Okay, so now I want to talk about the importance of having a marriage contract in modern marriages. Okay, why specifically in modern marriages and why not so much in marriages of old? So the difference is a big difference in the times that we live in now and the times that people lived in just 50 years ago. And one of the major differences is that we have a globalized world and we have um, various cultural considerations and expectations, and people don't anymore get married that much to people within their own culture. And even when they do get married to people within their own culture, they don't necessarily understand the expectations of that other person because it is not localized anymore. Okay, so what do I mean by that? In the past, people used to belong to a particular community, for example. In that community, there would probably be a few hundred people. There would be one church, perhaps, or one mosque, or one religious establishment, which will help shape the society, the cultural underpinnings, religious and cultural underpinnings, and expectations. So when people in that context got married, they would obviously marry someone from the village because there's uh, any one particular person, male or female, would know two or three prospective people to marry that they would have known for a very long time, for years and years, because it would be the neighbor down the road or the someone from the church or from the mosque or what have you. And then they'd marry that person, and also the person would be attending the same religious organization or institution under the same religious establishment with the same religious ideas and also the same cultural underpinnings. And in that scenario, you wouldn't need to expressly state in a contract what the expectations are of the sexual union because it will be naturally understood. And so, some of what was naturally understood, for example, and still is in various cultures, um, cannot be assumed anymore in the modern context. So, let me give an example of certain things that are naturally understood in certain cultures. When a woman marries a man, for example, in certain cultures and certain religious understandings, also, it is assumed that the man will be the breadwinner. Okay, so that is an assumption. That is an assumption that can, in many places and in many contexts, no longer be made. Okay, in the modern context, for example, there are a lot of men who expect, in fact, that the woman has to be a breadwinner also. Okay, so this is now something that cannot be overlooked or not discussed or contracted on. Okay, that's one example. There's another example also. Naturally, it is assumed in many cultures, Christian, for example, Muslim cultures also, that the wife will and ought to obey the husband as God commands in Scripture. But this is obviously considered in the modern context by many people, even of these religions, to be archaic and outdated in a more egalitarian era of equality, etc., etc. To expect a woman to obey a man is an affront to her dignity and honor, etc. And so the woman will not willingly, anyway, or not believe in that precept to begin with. So that, while would have been naturally understood 50 years ago in most of the world, is not naturally understood anymore in today's context. So that needs to be contracted in a marriage contract. That needs to be clear. It needs to be understood from the start. Look, this is the type of marriage is going to be a traditional marriage, for example. I will be the breadwinner as the man, you will be the homemaker. I will lead, you will follow, I will expect your obedience, especially in certain matters regarding your conduct outside of the home, for example. Okay, these are all things that you might want to contract in your marriage agreement, because it is an agreement on how you choose to live out the rest of your days with this other person. Okay, so those are things that are no longer naturally understood, which were naturally understood, and that's why it's more important in our time to actually spell out in a marriage contract what the parameters of marriage will be. Is it going to be a marriage with the parameters of the Bible or the Quran, or is it going to be a marriage that isn't going to be within those parameters, for example, but we will assume some of those parameters? So as an example of that, you could say, now you have to spell it out also. We're not naturally accepted also in many instances. When you get married, for example, will your wife be able to hang out with her male bestie? Is that okay with you? Or is that not going to be okay with you? Okay, so these are things you will need to also sometimes spell out, because the better thing is when you are upfront, you put your terms and conditions, both man and woman, to what you will agree to in the long run, or what you think is reasonable within the long run in your life. You can always disagree and not get married, and that's better than getting married and then having to fight through all of these issues for the rest of your life, right? Baseline issues. So I'm not saying that in a marriage contract you need to stipulate everything. Okay, I will make you tea every single morning. Although a contract is a contract, you can put anything in there and agree to it. But I mean, that's not, wouldn't make sense, right? But baseline issues, for example, financial issues, issues of conduct, right? How you will conduct yourself in the marriage, for example, issues of religious adherence, I think. So are you going to be a sort of lukewarm Christian and go to church once a year on Christmas? Or are you going to go to church every Sunday? I mean, because these are things that matter to people. These are things that are important to people. And if they don't stipulate it, then later on it will result in major problems within the marriage. I've seen this over and over again. So don't shy away from having serious discussions when you are in your negotiating phase, because you don't want to, you're afraid that you might chase the other person away. He might not like what your expectations are and you are going to drive him away, so you're not going to mention it rather now, but later on no, it doesn't work like that. Be upfront on both ends. Or you might think, okay, she's not going to like it if I say this or that, or I'm going to say, listen, when we get married you are not to wear miniskirts anymore, right? And she's going to say, well, it's my body and my choice and I'm free to do blah 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 blah. Let her be free and cut her loose, okay? Because it's not going to work for you. You should know yourself first and foremost and know what will work for you and what will not work for you. If you are a person who feels that it is undignified for other men to be sexualizing your wife deliberately, not just because she's a beautiful woman and it happens by mistake, because that is sort of pardonable, human nature, but deliberately because she dresses provocatively, for example, then you have the right to object to that, and the best time to object to that is in the very beginning. And if this is she considers this an inalienable divine right for her to look like a cheap girl, then you need to see her as a cheap girl and then cut her loose before anything moves ahead with your proposed marriage. So marriage contract, very important. Be upfront, completely upfront. from the beginning. If you are a guy that sees yourself as potentially having 2, 3, 4 wives, you got to say right from the start, look, I consider it my right to have 2, 3, 4 wives. This is what I will aspire to at some point, or I may not, because you don't know what the future holds, right? You may just decide it's too much of a headache and not do it. But if you think that you might be open to that, you need to say it from the get-go. Don't tell yourself, oh, you know what, I'm not going to say that, because if I'm going to say that this woman is never going to marry me, blah, 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 but meanwhile you believe it and you might try it later, and then that's like tricking the woman, right? You need to respect the autonomy of other people. So you need to be 100% upfront with your beliefs, your convictions, your expectations, and that person can simply say yes or no, and that is the mature way to go about it. And then you put it in writing, you sign a marriage contract that this is going to be the conditions of our sexual relationship. And I put that specifically because marriage is only ratified on consummation, because that's essentially what marriage is. Marriage is when two people have sex. Thank you very much, and I'd like to hear your thoughts and ideas on this. And also, before I go, the last thing I wanted to say is, when I did discuss this issue about a marriage contract, a lot of people took offense to it, because they're like, then he doesn't really love her, or she doesn't really love him, and a real man wouldn't want a marriage contract, etc. But what a lot of people are overlooking is, most of the time the people who want a marriage contract are actually women want the marriage contract even more than men, because they want them to put the monogamous clause in there, to say this will be the only wife, especially with Muslim men. That's another story. Or the woman wants to contract in the marriage that she will not be held back from pursuing a career or working, etc. So that she would want that in the marriage contract, women who are so inclined. Look, a contract is about negotiation. Look, if that's what she wants and that's not what you want, then that's not find someone who doesn't want that. And I think people just need to be mature enough to be upfront, if you're a guy that you want 2, 3, 4 wives, but the woman you're talking to, that's not what she wants, well, that's okay, right? She's not the one that you should be talking to then. But be upfront and respect the autonomy of the other person. That's what a contract is about. You speak about the things that matter. You speak about the things that are going to matter in the long run. Don't just go with your emotions and you're so in love, etc. Leave that for later. Talk business first. It is a business, it is a contract, it is a lifelong commitment. Hopefully that's what you hope for. And if you can get the lifestyle issues down, that you think this person would be a good person to live with, because that's his, and raise children with, and has the same morals and values and principles you have, then that's half the battle won. The romance of it is up and down. Sometimes you feel more in love than other times. You cannot base your rest of your life on that. I'm not saying that you can marry someone for which there is an absence of that, but that is something that would obviously come with time. So thank you very much, and until next time.